Okay, so I've taken a little bit of a hiatus from our Sundays and thought that it might be a interesting thing to do to kind of look at to revisit actually what I just did on Thursdays. So for those of you who are watching the video and who don't know that I do a weekly Thursday at noon Eastern, right now it's Eastern time, noon Eastern time, I do a clubhouse room called Bonatti Corner. And I usually talk about a lot of the things that I talk about in these videos. Mostly it's done to replicate what we do on these video channel or on this video channel. However, last week's or this last Thursday's session was something that we haven't actually dealt with or talked about here, and I thought we could do so, and I could kind of replicate what I did on Thursday, but I found a chart that I liked even more that I thought would be a really interesting example of what we're talking about. And so I'll start kind of in a similar way that I did. Actually, only I think one person here was at the original Thursday. Oh, here comes Dave. Fantastic. So another person coming in, which is great, who I think was not here or available to kind of see this or hear the session on Thursday. It is on replay. If you're on Clubhouse, it is on replays on replay under Soul of the Astrologer, which is the actual, I guess, club that I have. But the room is called Bonatti Corner. And this particular Bonatti Corner was on Fate versus Free Will. So I was talking about on Thursday about when I came to astrology I was introduced to astrology in 1980, but I came to astrology in 1992. And at the time that I came to astrology, it was really very influenced, or totally 100% influenced by psychology, and by psychological astrology, by humanistic, well, let's call it that, by humanistic astrology. And the superstar at that particular time was Liz Green. There was another guy, I think Jeffrey Forrest, who had written a book on Pluto. So there was a lot of focus. Chiron had just been kind of discovered, I think, in the 80s, and so there was all this new focus on Chiron. And I think that Liz Green might have written a book on Chiron, if I'm not mistaken. She might be even the one who called it the wounded healer, or that gave it its mythology. But there were other people that were also really important at the time. There was Rob Hand before he became the king of traditional astrology. There was Howard Sasportas. There was Stephen Arroyo. There were all these people, but all of the astrology was very much exemplifying what either Mark Edmund Jones or Alan Leo in the beginning of the 20th century said about astrology, which was character is destiny. So in the 19th century, when people started getting arrested for being astrologers because they were doing divination, and also when people started getting more, shall we say, uncomfortable with the deterministic aspect of astrology, and that's not anything new. I mean, Pico della Mirandola, back in the 16th century, he was completely upset because the astrologer told him how old he would be and how he would die, and he got pissed off and wrote this entire diatribe against astrology, and then proceeded to die at exactly the age and in the manner that he was told. So that's all. There's always been this thing about grappling with determinism has always been the thing. And so when I came into astrology, a lot of the understanding about astrology was that, astrology is just a marker, or astrology is just a guidepost. You're not bound. I think really, or rather really that's the messaging. The messaging was that your astrology isn't really binding. It's reflective, but not binding. And so here comes Rhonda. Wonderful. More people. Fantastic. It was reflective, but not binding, was the attitude about astrology, or the belief about astrology, or the approach. Even more importantly, the approach to astrology was with this kind of, it's this mirror reflection that you're not really bound to. You don't have to. It's an option. It's an option provided to you by this thing. So I came into astrology with that kind of mindset myself. Was very interested in oh, Dave, were you able to get in? Hold on a second here. Let me just be sure. Looks like he's trying. Okay. All right, great. Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad to see everyone. So, I came to astrology with this. So here's Kartik. Wonderful. More fabulous people. Good. I'm glad we've got somebody from the Jyotish side coming in too. I'd like for us to get into some discussion down the road. And Kartik, I'm going to be using traditional Western astrology for my delineation, but we are going to be talking about. I mean, we're talking fate versus free will, so we're going to be talking about this idea of determinism, which is kind of where I just got to, and about also the West's reflexive need or reflexive response to determinism, which is to assert its individuality or its will. And so here comes the concept of free will. So also at the same time that I come to astrology, prior to that, I was involved with the New Age movement. I was a spiritualist. And as a result of that, there was this woman named Louise Hay. Wonderful. There was this woman named Louise Hay, who some of you may have heard of. Louise Hay wrote a book called You Can Heal Your Life. And in my opinion, she's responsible for a lot of the more rigid beliefs about how your thinking can create reality. Now, I'm not saying that your thinking does not create reality at all, but she was I want to say she was a bit of a Nazi about it. And to the extent of which, especially because she believed that every disease was the result of a thought. So she was kind of like a Christian Scientist on steroids. But using words. And so she would say, okay, you got a liver problem. This is the affirmation that you need to do to heal that liver problem. And so she would assign an affirmation to everything. And so that became kind of the blanket way of looking at everything. The blanket way of looking at everything was that the reason we don't have the thing that we want is because in our mind somewhere, and we still see it in our minds somewhere, right? Even now, especially like with the whole prosperity gospel thing. I remember hearing some African guy come into a clubhouse thing and say, oh, if you don't have financial prosperity, check your spirituality. Your spirituality isn't right if you don't have financial prosperity. That's pure bullshit. That's poppycock. As far as India would be concerned, that's the opposite of what being spiritual is. That's as far as Jesus is concerned, right? Get rid of all your shit and follow me, right? So, but that's where things have turned. So even this kind of new age prosperity thinking has even kind of infiltrated Christianity, so that we have a prosperity gospel, which means that you can't be fully Christian if you're poor. And so there was this idea that if you're not kind of financially, that the greatest example of you being spiritually together is having your financial thing together. And I'm here to tell you that, in my opinion, that's absolute poppycock. But at the same time, it means that it does two things that are good, or a thing that is good and bad. It says that the problem starts with you, which I absolutely agree with. But it doesn't actually say that there might be conditions that you may have agreed to before incarnating that you don't have control over. It might not say that there are the three types of karma, which is basically what I prescribe to when it comes to this idea of fate versus free will. There are three types of karma. There's the karma you can change. There's the karma you cannot change. There's the karma, some of which you can change and some of which you cannot. And the entire life path is about distinguishing which kind we are involved in. And of course, the beginning of changing karma, our karma, is changing ourself, right? We were talking about this on Thursday, is changing our own susceptibility to falling into these karmic rabbit holes. So if we attract certain types of people, but we don't want to anymore, then we have to check our own susceptibility to that type of person, and to that type of talk, and to that type of manner. And then once we conquer it, then we can either create a new cycle that attracts new people or not. And so That's what, in my opinion, New Age thought, spiritual thought in this day and age doesn't want to really take into account, that no is a possibility, and that we are limited by certain things, that we are limited by certain conditions. Certainly, the main two, obviously the main two things that came up immediately were the family into which we are born and the body into which we are born. Right? So the body into which we are born, some of us love our bodies, some of us hate them. Some of us work on those bodies and they still look like we don't want them to look. Some of us do different types of surgery in order to change them, right? But ultimately, everybody's in a body that they're limited to, right? Somebody wants to be a dancer but has 2 left feet. Somebody wants to be a porn star but has a 3-inch dick. Some, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Thus, and not to say that there isn't a niche of porn for him, mind you, but that's my issue, my thing. So ultimately, the thing is then that, okay, if there is no such thing as fate, if we really have control over everything, then the chart shouldn't necessarily be binding. Right. And I've even heard people say things like, you should be able to transcend your chart, or your goal should be to transcend the chart. In my opinion, I do not necessarily agree with that, in my opinion. And also what I believe is that if indeed the chart can be read, can be delineated in a very specific manner, and we just were on a call with a clubhouse room with C.S. Ravindramani, who is one of the best astrologers I've ever met in my life, and can in detail talk about, can nail the chart in every fucking detail. And that means what? Where's the free will? If he can tell you not only that you're gonna have heart problems, but tell you in which dasha and bhukti, in which period of life the heart problem should happen, or Kartik or him or any of these wonderful Jyotish people, right? If they can do that, then that means it's there in the chart. Don't transcend. I just use it to enhance it. Exactly. Don't transcend. Just, well, that was my point. Exactly. That I didn't. That was exactly. So that's exactly my point. Is my opinion now, because it's really about, because when we find people talking about their opinions about the astrology chart, what you're really just doing is talking your astrology. Right? When you're talking your belief, you're talking your astrology. So as per my own astrology, my belief is that we don't transcend the chart. We have the opportunity to become the best version. We have the opportunity to become the best version. We have the opportunity to experience, what shall we say, we have the opportunity to ascend within this clay body. Right. And to whatever extent that we're able to, or that we're given the ability to. Wow, it's getting big. Right. So we have the ability to ascend within this clay body. But actually, one of the things I was saying actually on Thursday was, a leopard cannot change its spots. We cannot be something different than what we are. But we can rearrange the spots. And the astrology is the leopard spots. Our astrology is the spectrum of our spots. We can rearrange them, we can gloss them up, we can put glitter on them, we can shine them up, but we cannot make them different. We cannot be different people. And I gave different examples of that on Thursday. And so something like where, even like Sai actually last week, I put Errol Flynn's chart up for the Jyotish learners. Sai last week had no idea who the person was, had just got on, said, did the person die in 1959? Errol Flynn died in 1959. I mean, that was one of the very first things he asked. That means, okay, so my point to kind of bringing that up is, and Sai's here with us right now, by the way, brilliant astrologer. If Sai could read it, that means it was written. I mean, that's something you all are starting to hear me say quite a bit. If I can read it, that means it's written. We had a woman that came in 2 weeks ago when I did the session on Mars on Thursday, and she had Mars in Cancer, and I asked her if she had chest issues, and she said all of her life she's had issues with her chest. I asked her if Mars was in the 3rd house, and Mars is a significator for brothers. I said, do you have a brother that's had a hard time of it? Do you have a brother that's gone to jail? She'd had several, right? Now, that's not to brag about my ability. That's to once again further say, if I can read it, it's in there to be read. It's there to be read, which means, wait, where's the free will? Where's the free will coming in? Where's the free will part of what happens? The free will is as per our astrology, in my opinion, as per our astrology. So, I want to give us an example of this. I have a few charts that I'm going to use. I'm going to use the same charts from Thursday, with the exception of Leontine Price, who we talked about to quite an extent. And I might bring her back up if we want to. And we also looked at Billie Holiday. And we, there's a bunch of fun things that we looked at and talked about in respect to some of this stuff. And it was very interesting to see, especially because Billie Holiday and Leontine Price had the same ascendant. And they both had a conglomerate of planets in Pisces in the 2nd house, which represents the voice, and why they should have such different trajectories. So that might be something to do, especially since we're looking at this idea of fate versus free will. Towards the end, we got into some very interesting things about the lights and holes, WHOLES. Okay, so this is the chart of Arturo Toscanini, who is the greatest orchestra conductor of the 20th century, especially of the first part of the 20th century. So the 1900 to 1950. He died in 55 or 57. Yeah, 57, I think he died. So long life, the longevity, etc. But what really got me interested in this chart, and what made me like, oh my god, I gotta blah blah blah, because this was obviously, this is a person I'm very well aware of. Was just listening to him conducting something a few days ago, or the day before yesterday, but at the same time wasn't really that intimate with his biography. Well, one of the things that I learned was that, first of all, Toscanini started as a cellist. And that Toscanini is from Parma, Italy, where Parmesan cheese comes from. And Parma is really well known for the Teatro Regio, which is the opera theater, or the main, and it's the main kind of musical kind of place in Parma. And he basically went to the music school that fed into this opera house. And while he was playing for the Parma theater, he was invited by, I guess, one of the kind of assistant conductors to go to South America with him to basically do a touring opera company. This was really, really popular at the beginning of the century. European companies would, for the winter, they would go to South America, because then the weather was fantastic. So they would leave, they would go, or rather they would, no, that's right. They would do the winter season in Europe, and then they would go for the winter season in South America, because it was the opposite. And so this was really, really common. So he went. He goes to Rio de Janeiro, and there's this, and he's 18. This guy's 19. This guy's 19 years old. He's second cellist. He's a second cellist in the orchestra. And as it's a performance of, or they're trying to kind of get the season going. And during this rehearsal of Aida, everything's up in arms, because the conductor that they have is garbage. He can't conduct. He's a composer, but he's a terrible conductor, and nobody can follow him, and no one wants to go on, and people are wanting to strike, and the singers hate him. And then another guy decides to come up, but they hate him. But it turns out that Toscanini has this interesting talent, his memory. Toscanini, from the time that he's been in Parma, he's been working with singers and going through all of this material as a pianist, etc., and learning the shit from memory. And he's been the assistant choral director for this tour. And so he's been working with the singers and the chorus from memory, playing all this fucking shit from memory. So all of a sudden people are like, well, hey, wait a minute, that cello guy, Arturo Toscano, the little guy, the youngster, ask him, he knows the whole fucking thing, ask him. And so they're like, please, you know, get up and do it, get up and do it. There's a fucking riot going on. There's a riot. I mean, there is a riot. There is a riot going on in the theater. The theater is up in arms and they won't leave. It's the kind of thing where they're not like so mad that they'll go. They're so mad that they're staying. They're going to get their fucking money's worth. You're going to stay and do this performance. Find us a conductor. So they're like, please go on, please go on, please go on. So he goes on, and this is the birth of this guy's and is immediately elevated. This is a story of sudden elevation. And so so I want to look at this chart from a lot of different ways. The first way, obviously, is fate versus free will. And this is the fate versus free will part that I want to get really specific about. Because he even says it. Oh, do I have it open? In the book, he says, it was out of the frying pan into the fire. What is the thing that I keep saying on Thursdays? Well, actually, you know, I haven't been talking on Sundays. So some of the stuff I say on Thursdays, I haven't been saying on Sundays because there haven't been any. One of the things I keep saying on Thursdays is, if you really want to know how the astrology is working, listen to the words that you're using or that are being used to describe the situation. The astrology is in them, because the words are Mercury. The thought themselves is the moon. Those are both sides of the mind. Both sides of the mind carry all the astrological. They're like the fool's pouch. Marlene will get that, because inside the fool's pouch is the zodiac. So it's like the fool's pouch. Inside the mind is the fool's pouch. And inside the mind are all the different possibilities that the zodiac and the planetary things could show up and be. Right? So inside your mind is all the different variations in which the astrology is showing up, and all the different ways in which you can put it into words. So when on 2 Thursdays ago, when we were doing Saturn, and Angela said, it's a chore it's just a chore to get anything done. And we're like, ha, 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 there's Saturn. And she said, is it my Saturn in the 6th? And we're like, is it ever, right? Because we could tell from the words. So even from the words that Toscanini said, he said, out of the frying pan into the fire, which made me think, oh, this is a trial by fire. This is a trial by fire. This is this is kind of like a trial by fire, underworld ritual trial by fire situation, which in my opinion, tradition, as far as traditional Western is concerned, is an 8th house matter. Okay, so the 8th house here is Leo, so it's a fire sign. Now, the important thing to understand about being a conductor is that the conductor is really like the king of classical music, right? The conductor is royalty, right? The prima donnas and whatever else are too, but they have to make it to prima donna. The conductor, the minute like a person starts conducting, they're leading the orchestra. They're the king. It is very much a solar profession, and solar type people tend to be involved in it. So the main thing that I ended up seeing was that, look at how Mercury is with the sun. Mercury represents your memory, right? Mercury represents memory, right? This was his amazing talent. This guy's amazing talent. Orchestral music is sacred to Apollo, says CF. All right. So Mercury is with Apollo. Also, and remember that the 10 muses aren't they daughters of Apollo too? Like, the 10 muses who represent all of the arts and humanities, they're all daughters of Apollo as well. And this is why, remember when we were talking about the sun on one of our Sundays, we talked about how unlike how the moon becomes everything she touches, the sun has every signification of every planet in it, because he's the source of all. right? And so the sun has music, the sun has benevolence, the sun has violence, the sun has all of it, right? Because he's the spark of life of the whole thing. He's the light and life of the entire thing. He's the spark plug. So noting here that not only is the eighth house ruled by the sun, and it's within 3 degrees of Regulus, and might even be closer because he's born in 1867, and the fact that the ruler of the eighth is exalted. Okay, so the ruler of the eighth is exalted, and that we have Mercury. Now, Mercury is a really important planet as far as some of these Arabic parts or Egyptian lots are concerned, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But I want to do so. There's, like I said, there's a few different ways that I kind of want to look at this chart. But let's just kind of go into the basics of this chart for a second. So it's Capricorn rising, which obviously gives us Saturn as the ruler of the ascendant. Note that Saturn and the moon are together here in the 10th house. Note that they're even though they're in a northern sign, Saturn represents the west. Saturn is a western planet, and the moon is the ruler of the 7th, which represents the west, and they are in a western angle. I'm going to teach you something. There's this thing called the place of exaltation. There's also something called the lot of exaltation as well, which is just a little bit different. But there's a thing called the place of exaltation where you take either by day the sun to the sign of Aries or the moon to the sign of Taurus by whole sign, right? So in this particular case, you would take the moon to Taurus, which would be 7 houses away, right? But you would then, that distance, you would then project from the ascendant, right? So 7 houses from the ascendant is Cancer, right? So not only is Cancer the ruler of the, not only is Cancer the ruler of the 7th house, or or on the cusp of the 7th, which is the west, but the moon is ruling the west with the Saturn, which rules the west, right? And the moon is the ruler of the exaltation of this chart, even though it itself is in the sign of its fall. Now, it's in the midheaven, which is south. This guy went from Italy to Rio, which is southwest of his direction, and became exalted. That's the beginning of this guy's exaltation, is in the southwest. This already points to the west and the south as being an auspicious place. I want to look at profection for a second, because what we're gonna find something interesting. So profection, as you all know, is when we perfect the ascendant, or anything. We can perfect anything, mind you, but we're going to just do it with the ascendant for right now. To perfect means to advance. And so what we do is, for each year, we advance the ascendant 30 degrees. Okay, so 30 degrees, not a cusp, but 30 degrees, as though it's a whole sign chart. All right, so that means that for each year, for each person's year, a different planet will be the lord of the year, or will come to a different cusp. So Capricorn is obviously for the 0 to 1, 12 to 13, 24 to 25, 36 to 37, etc. And so this would be first year of life, this would be age 2, etc., on, right? Okay, so this would take us to 12. This would take us to 24. Sagittarius to 23, Scorpio to 22, Libra to 21, Virgo to 20, Leo to 19. Right? This person was born March 25th, 1867. All of this stuff started June 25th, is around the beginning of this. What did I say? This trial by fire, 8th house, in my opinion. So here we are. So already the sun is the ruler of the year. We've come to, we have been perfected back to the 8th house. For those of you who know perfection, be sure I'm doing this correctly. 24, 23, 22, 21, 20, 19. This happened in 1886. Okay, so this is March of 1886. And already so what we would do natally, so for someone like Sai, who hasn't maybe used or isn't, for Western isn't his thing and hasn't used this before. So then the ruler of the year becomes this planet. And we would look at it. I mean, we might get the solar return out and look at that. Why not? But why don't we? But this planet now becomes the ruler of the year. So natally, look and see how already this exalted sun with Mercury, the ruler of my memory, is the ruler of the year. Then what we could do is we because all of this started around the 25th of June, right? This guy's born on the 25th of March. We can perfect starting from the March 25th, we can perfect forward by month. This is March 25. Virgo is April. Libra is May. Scorpio is June, with all the shit we were talking about. Southwest. This is the Southwest. Now, of course, I know, yes, I know, by whole sign, Scorpio is really the 11th house, but it's the midheaven, which is due south, right? And the midheaven, in this particular case, or rather the 11th house, points southeast, right? So in this case, we've got two planets that are Western, canceling out the eastern part, but definitely going down with the south. Now look at this part. We can also, for those of you who are into zodiacal releasing, just looking at it from looking at the part of fortune. The part of fortune is in Taurus. Venus gets 8 years. So Taurus gets 8 years. That's the first 8 years of life. Of course, it shows us that music is something that this person was immediately involved with. I think he was a bit of a prodigy. Oh, the other thing I want you to note that the Sun and Mercury are at the cusp of the 3rd house, which is the hands. This guy was a cellist. And also this guy was a conductor who waved his arms around. So that's the first 8 years. The next 20 years, which is ruled by the sign of Gemini, because Mercury has 20 years, here we come, 20 to 28. This is the period of that sudden illumination. We can do the same thing with the part of spirit, which is supposed to be even more. So for those of you who are not familiar with what I'm talking about, I've kind of jumped all over, mostly because this is my usual space. And so like for instance, like Shanice is here. There are a few other people, CF is here, Dave is here. So there are people who are, kind of know me. And those of you who've been watching these videos know me, etc. I know that I've got some people who are new to what I'm talking about, and I'm kind of jumping all over the place. And I'm kind of jumping all over the place with this Toscanini chart. So part of it is just because it was such an exciting find for me, especially. But once again, what really got me was the fact that he himself used the words, oh, and boy, and once I said yes, it was out of the frying pan into the fire. And that the fact was because of his memory. Everybody pushed it because of his memory, and fire. It was a trial by fire, because it was a high pressure situation. Like I said, the audience was in revolt. So just all of this, it was this crucible of fire that this person, and because I was thinking, oh, well, it makes some sense that the moon Saturn too, right? That makes sense too, that that the elevation comes with moon Saturn, the pressure, the difficulty, the anxiety, the hardness. Will it take it? Will it not? Will it go? Will it happen? Will I fail? Because seriously, this tour was going to fold. It was in that kind of shape. It was going to just and it just started. So it was going to fold. So I was like, so there must be a trial by fire in this chart. That was basically what I thought it has to be. And it must be a trial by fire that leads to a sudden elevation or a major elevation of some point. And sure enough, think about how an 8th house trial would elevate, right? That's another good term for exalt, right? That situation. I mean, seriously, that's like a miracle, that's like when the chorus girl gets picked out of the chorus and she becomes a Broadway star kind of thing. That's the exact same thing. It's even more so when you think like the second cellist becomes one of the greatest names in classical music of all time, right? That's basically, and it's this event. That was what got me about it. It was this event that made it happen. It was this event that is the seed, the kernel of all of that actually happening. So in astrology, so these days, people use asteroids, for those of you who are kind of newish. You hear them talking about Liliths and Cereses and all of these other things. In the traditional era, people used parts or lots. And what a lot is it's essentially the distance between two things that significate the same thing. And my favorite example for that is father. So the daytime significator for father is the sun. The nighttime significator for the father is Saturn. So in a chart, you could find the distance between the sun and Saturn, and then you could project that same distance from the ascendant, and you would do it from the ascendant because the ascendant is called the house of life. And so basically anything that represents the life is going to come from the ascendant. Anything that's going to affect the life. So for instance, the part of death is not projected from the ascendant. It's projected from Saturn, who's the natural ruler of death. But in almost every other case, all of these distances, and you can see the charts, that's right. So here's the sun, and here's Saturn, right? So there's a distance between them. So it's nighttime because the sun is below this line, which is called the line of the horizon, right? So the sun is down here. If the sun were up here, it would be daytime. He's born at 3 a.m., so it makes perfect sense, right? So what we're looking for then is the distance from Saturn, starting from Saturn's position to the sun's position, as opposed to starting from the sun's position, going to Saturn's position. Now, Saturn is at 23 Scorpio, and to do some fast math, we know that 23 Scorpio to 23 Pisces, which is another water sign like Scorpio, is 123 degrees. Is 120 degrees, rather.
Right.
Okay, so from Scorpio to Pisces, that relationship from Scorpio to Pisces, another water sign, same thing with Cancer, is 120 degrees. So we would move forward 120 degrees, but then we've got 10 more degrees to go because the sun is at 3 degrees of Aries, which is the next sign over. So that means that the distance that we're going to project from here is going to be 120 plus 10. So we're going to round this up to 20 degrees of Capricorn, and we're going to go to another earth sign because signs of the same element always trine each other. And the trine is 120 degrees. Oh, someone have a question? Okay. And and so that would take us to 20 plus 10. Oh, but now, so that takes us, oh, that's right. It takes us right to the end, to like 2952. So it takes us to the 30th degree of Taurus. Okay. So that is where father, that's what we would look to for father in this chart. So that's one of the things, rather. That would be where the part of father is in this chart. Now, has nothing to do with necessarily whether or not it comes into contact with the fourth house, which it just happens to. The fourth house is the house of father, or whether it's connected to Saturn or the sun, which in this particular case it isn't. But this is just my example of what we would be doing. So the part of fortune is the distance between the sun and the moon. And it's really important because the distance between the sun and the moon is basically the relationship between Shiva and Shakti in the chart. And it's the relationship between what in Vedic philosophy would be considered Prakriti and Shakti, which is basically form that's unpotentiated or in potential, that has to be acted upon by Shakti in order to, or rather, it's really material or matter in potential that has to be acted on by Shakti in order to be made form. So Shakti is this vivifying and also organizing principle in the universe that then acts upon matter. And so that union, sun and moon, Shiva and Parvati, that union is basically what sustains all life. And these are the two eyes. As a matter of fact, very soon we're going to be coming across, we're going to be coming into something called Akshaya Tritiya, which is when the sun and the moon are both exalted. And so both eyes in the sky are at their strongest. And if you remember, we did a thing on Akshaya Tritiya with Marlene for one of her rooms. We did some stuff around that. What an auspicious day that actually really is. And it's because these two powerful eyes are they're both in their exalted positions during that time. So that's why the part of fortune matters. And so if it's by day, we start from the sun's position and then we go to the moon. If it's nighttime, we would do something different. Now, there's another one that uses the same formula, but switches it. It's called the part of spirit. And it's got a lot of other interesting titles like futurorum, which is the part of the future. Part of things that are absent. So it has a lot to do with stuff that's going to happen to us which we don't know about, and that which is unseen. The unseen things that we have to look forward to is a lot of what the spirit is about. So we know that it's 120 plus 10 from the, oh wait, no, I'm sorry, it's a different thing. That was 120 plus 10 for Saturn. So we're going to do the part of fortune and the part of spirit. We've already got the part of fortune right here, but I'm going to do the demonstration. So from the moon's position, because it's nighttime, so we'd start from the moon to the sun, it's 120, so to 28 Pisces plus 5. 120 degrees from 20
degrees of sun.
Say that again, from moon to sun. 120 is 28 Scorpio to 28 Pisces is 120, and then another 5 degrees towards the sun's position is would be the exact. So it would be 2459, which is what we have. To the 25th degree of Taurus is the part of fortune. We're now going to find the part of spirit, which is the reverse formula. So we're going to start from the sun's position and go to the moon. Now, of course, that would be 240 minus 5, right? 204. We can just go back 120 and back 5. So back 120 is 3 degrees of Sagittarius, right? And back 5 is 28 degrees of Scorpio. All right. So we're going to do the same thing for the ascendant. Back 120 is 20 degrees of Virgo, and back 5 is 15 degrees, is the 15th degree of Virgo. So if we were to zodiacally release that period, if we were to start, we would start the zodiacal releasing of the spirit from this period. The first 20 years of life would be ruled by the Mercury, who's down here with the ruler of the 8th and the trial by fire, which is also the sudden illumination. There is another thing I want to look at. It's called the part of those who are suddenly elevated. And there was another one that I wanted to look at. Maybe it's called the part of travel on water, because during this time, this is before planes. So they took a boat. And one of the things that they mentioned about him was that he was unlike everybody else and didn't suffer from boat sickness, or what's the word, seasickness at all. Okay, hold on a second. Let me find this. Those who are suddenly elevated, illodum qui repente sublimantur. It is taken from Saturn to the part of fortune, and by night the reverse. Okay, so Saturn to the part of fortune. Well, that's easy. Or night the reverse. It's going to be from the part of fortune to Saturn. It's the exact opposite. 180 degrees minus 1. So 180 degrees, 20 degrees minus 1, 19 degrees of Cancer. There's the sudden elevation. And remember what happened? We started here on March 25th. This was March 25th, 1886. So we know that some kind of difficulty, some kind of fear or anxiety or something's going to come up. And note also that he's with the ruler of the natural ninth. It was a long distance journey, right? And so the natural ninth house, he's with the ruler of the natural ninth house. He's with the, so it's even a long distance journey. So this was our March, this was April, this was May. Here we come to June. Here's the planet that rules the part of sudden elevation. And it's with the ruler of the ascendant in the 10th house. And we've already talked about how both of these planets represent the West. Saturn because he naturally represents West, the moon because she represents the Western angle, and they're in the Southern angle. And he went southwest on a long distance journey. Note also that a Western sign is on the sign of the 9th house, and that the 9th house represents the Southwest. And that Venus, the ruler of the 9th house, is with, she's in also a Western sign. Now, Jupiter represents the North, so that's not quite so. And mind you, also, Cancer, the water signs are Northern, but the angle is what I'm talking about. The moon as the ruler of the angle, she's the ruler of the Western angle, is the point that I'm actually making here. And of course, Jupiter is exalted in the Western angle too. So we've got the Venus in a Western sign with the planet exalted in the Western angle. We've got the planet who is remember the place of exaltation is ruled by this moon. And then now also what we're finding is the planet of sudden elevation is also ruled by this moon. And so that is also quite interesting. And the fact that we have both the ruler of the 10th. The 10th is on both of those things. And yes, thank you. The mutual reception between the moon and Mars, and applies to Saturn, moon in public 10th, right? And we have two things. We've got the Venus. What we really have here, okay, so, this is thank you so much, CF. I'm so glad you mentioned that. We've got the mutual reception, although this is the separating type. So this is the second most effective type. It's an aspect, but it's separating. So we've got the separating aspect with the mutual reception. And then look at what we also have here. We've got, this is an example of collection, actually, or actually the moon is moving away from this collection. Jupiter is the planet who collected. So it started really with Mars.
Yeah.
Right? It started with Mars, then went to Venus, then went to Saturn, then Jupiter collected all of them. Note that Venus is still applying to Saturn, and so is Mars. And that once again, Saturn is the ruler of the ascendant. So remember in Leontyne Price's chart, Saturn was the ruler of the ascendant, and he was also in the midheaven. He was in Sagittarius in the midheaven. Right. And so in my opinion, actually, one of the things even Bonatti says is that if you've got that one of the signs for fame is a night chart with Saturn in the 10th and Saturn in the midheaven. Isn't that interesting? You know what I think? And one of the things that Leontyne Price says over and over again is this: you got to burn the midnight oil to work on craft. You really got to burn the midnight oil. Isn't that a sense of a night chart? And of a Saturn in the midheaven, working, toiling into the night? Mm-hmm. So, and see, we've got other charts like that too. Arthur Rubinstein with the Saturn in Cancer in the 10th. And he got into his highest fame at 75, 65, 75. Leontyne Price with it at night. All of these are nighttime charts. So it's something that we might want to revisit. Of course, I'm doing this class on fame on the 28th, but we might want to revisit Bonatti. In my opinion, it's not as effective as mine. But we might want to revisit Bonatti's version, because Bonatti's version talks about Saturn in the 10th for a nighttime chart. He talks about either sun in the 10th for the daytime chart, or moon, or not necessarily moon, but yeah, either moon or Saturn in the chart. And he doesn't say why, and he doesn't say anything else about it, unfortunately. But because I've seen Many charts, especially of classical musicians with Saturn in the midheaven. I see what he's talking about, and I see it as being a possibility, especially when it's ruler of the ascendant. Right, and in this case, it's ruler. That's, we were talking about that, what, 2 Thursdays ago, when we were talking about Saturn, and about how Saturn, any planet, when it's ruler of the ascendant, it's still got to be itself, but some of its maleficence becomes sublimated because you're busy becoming it. And so it isn't sublimated, but it becomes experienced internally. And it's all about how well you actually are able to be that Saturnian person or martial person. Are you doing it right? Are you doing it well? Note that the Mars is in Cancer here. This was a guy who was known to drive the orchestra really hard, have temper tantrums. See, when we look at Mars in Cancer, we think, oh, that person, they're not connected to their emotions. In my opinion, it's just the opposite. When you have got the Saturn and the Mars that are in their fall or their detriments, especially their fall, they're really badly behaved. They'll be their worst self. Mars, and think Cancer already sucks, right? I mean, V, it was funny when you asked me the question, I couldn't believe that I thought Taurus first. I fucking hate the sign of Cancer. I don't hate it. I don't hate any sign. I don't hate any sign. And I love, but the Cancer is the one that will put you through their paces because they're always in a different fucking place emotionally, and it's fucking exhausting, right? So, and that's because the ocean never serves up the same wave, right? Every wave is different. Every wave, the Cancer rules the oceans. Every wave from the sea is different. She never serves it up the same thing. It sure is. It sure is on my 8th. Right. And moon's a moon. That means my moon's the ruler, right? She never serves it up the same way. She never gives you the same type of wave. And so that's the same thing with our Cancer friends and our Cancer rising friends and our Cancer moon friends, right? Every time you see them, it's like, bitch, fuck, I just wanted to have a nice, enjoyable day together, and you're fucking ranting on about this shit. Or, oh, wow, or I was kind of depressed, but God, I'm so glad you're so happy today. It's like, well, what the fuck? You can never put, I'm recording. Yes, I am. Thank you. Thank you for reminding me, though. Yeah, so, I mean, that's the thing, especially our Cancer rising friends, right? They're the most exhausting. They're the worst, right? They're the fucking worst. So, and we love them. We fucking love them, but they're the most exhausting. They're the most hard to handle. They're the most, we wish we were in another room when things melt down for them. So I know I'm digressing a little bit and getting saucy, but but yes. Okay, so with that in mind, and with the Mars, we can see it there. We can see it there when the moon is opposite sun in terms of consistency. Yes, indeed. Well, and a good point about that, because she rules changeability. That's one of these things that we've forgotten over the years, that's her actual signification is changeability. And one of the things we learned when we looked at the stuff about the moon was that, to be honest, she's unmoored if she's not in relationship to another planet, that she's at her worst. That's why she's considered feral, when she's not going to make an aspect in the sign she's in. That's why void of course is considered fucked up, because she's no longer reliable. She no longer has a reference point through which or via which to give you what you say you want. And so that's really, I mean, here we have it. We've got a chart where the moon is void of course. I mean, she has no power to make more aspects, right? Exactly. Well, and making aspects is perfection, right? We've talked a lot about perfection, which is the successful completion of a matter, right? So she can't perfect, but other things can, right? And in my opinion, she already has in this chart, because Jupiter has already collected. Right, that's what I'm talking about. So the last aspect she made was she translated Mars, ruler of the 10th, Venus, who is music and ruler of the part of fortune, and Saturn, the ruler of the ascendant, to Jupiter, who's the greater benefic and who's with Venus. right? Who's also benefic. And look at how also Venus is applying to the Saturn and Jupiter is separating. So that's kind of a positive version of besiegement for the Saturn as well. So there's all of these ways in which this particular person is being blessed in this chart. Once again, fate or free will. I mean, the fate of this chart is that we can even just see from the Venus and the Saturn going to the Jupiter, Jupiter going to the Saturn, that there's some kind of fate. We saw that with Ella Fitzgerald, with the sun being surrounded by the Saturn, the Jupiter, and the Venus. Right. So in this particular case, although we've got a separating aspect, a void, of course, moon, she's done. She's smoking her cigarette and wiping herself down. She's like, okay, fuck. You know what I mean? She's finished. She's like, yes, my work is done. And so think to be incarnated like that, where all of the genius is already there. All of the genius is there, all of the blah, blah, blah is there, etc. But my real point about fate was that this chart had within it was fated to have a sudden illumination as a result of going through a crucible of some kind of trial by fire. I'm going to open it to questions and comments while I look for the solar return. And I thought we can, let's kind of play with that for a second and see what we think about that.
The solar return, okay.
Yeah, because also the thing is you want to see what the ruler of the year looks like in the solar return. So we're going to go for, what is it, March 25?
For his 19th year, right?
1886. And we're going to do it for Rio de Janeiro. Okay.
Oh, he's putting in the solar return. Okay.
Yeah, we're going to do the solar return for Rio because that's where he was. Well, actually, no, he was in Parma still. Wait, let's go back. Thanks. He was still in Parma. Oh, here comes Tamarius. Yay. He was still in Parma because he went to Rio from Parma. I want to go to Italy so fucking bad. And here's some coming back in. Right. Let's do that one. Apply. And okay, let's see here. All right, Parma, Italy. Okay, so look at, there's this, of course it's a solar return, isn't? Oh, I wish Layla were here because we were talking about when the sun is the ruler of the year, that there were certain authors that believed that you couldn't use the sun and the moon as the ruler of the year because once again, because of this idea of holes, WHOLES, of holes. But note that the sun is exalted, obviously, again, it's in the Western angle. Note that the sun is in the Western angle. That's the thing I want to bring your attention to. And that Jupiter that we were looking at is the ruler of the Western angle. It's in the ascendant. And very interesting. Note also, interesting, the part of fortune is the exact same. Often it would not necessarily have to be that case. So it's the exact same thing. It's a completely different ascendant, but it's the exact same one. And now it's on the cusp of the 9th house, long distance journeys. And now the Venus is 10 houses away from the part of fortune. Mercury's placement 2. And the Mercury, oh yes, and that's look at how isn't this weird? It was a Capricorn rising chart, wasn't it? But we had, it was Leo on the cusp of the 8th. Look at how now the Sun Mercury square, the Sun Mercury is basically, it's not the same degree, but the Sun Mercury thing is now the 8th house of this chart. And Sun and Mercury are still in Aries together. This is very interesting. I think what they would have said is to be looking for the ruler of the sun or something. I wish that I knew, and I don't think there's probably anybody here who has read the Mashallah on solar revolutions. But there was a whole thing that where he talked about not using the sun and the moon. But just based on what we're seeing, there are already enough similar. Let's see if we were to. Let's see. Oh, remember how I said Virgo was the natural 9th house? It's the whole sign 9th of the other chart. And now we've got the Jupiter. And now we've got the Jupiter basically, and the Jupiter Uranus basically really close to the cusp of the natal 9th. We've got the Saturn on the Western angle, on the natal Western angle. So that's the chart ruler. And so now, we got the chart ruler still up there, but now he's in the sign of the natal Western angle. We've got the moon in Sag, which of course is a sign of adventure. Who's the ruler of you said the Mercury position, that's right. And the Mercury's so close to the 8th house. So yes, thank you, V. Thank you. The Mercury's, I get it now. Because it's now the ruler of the 10th and the 8th. Remember how I'm always talking about how it's not the 10th house isn't what you do, it's what you experience when you do it. And that's what happened as he did it. Mercury, there's the 8th house, there's that trial. So interesting. And note also the mutual, that's not a mutual reception, but the exchange between Mercury and Mars, who's the ruler of the 8th. And Mercury, remember, and Mercury's the ruler of the ascendant. So we've got an exchange between the ruler of the ascendant and the ruler of the 8th in this chart. Oh my God. See? If it can be read, it's written. If it can be read, it's written, y'all. Which means that where it comes down to this idea of whether or not it's, there's such a thing as free will, it has to be within the context of your own personal astrology. Actually, Marlene and I were just talking about this, and she was talking about about some of the stuff she's doing. She doesn't want to be doing, but it's her karmic duty. She knows it's her karmic duty. She kind of has to do it. And she's like, and she goes, look, there's my free will. I don't have to. I could say fuck this shit. I'm not going to do it, but I'm doing it. And there I am. I mean, I'm sure I'm doing my free will, but it's my free will but it's her free will as per her astrology, which is highly conscientious, which is anxious if she's not doing it correctly or not doing it fully, which is fully about commitment to practice, right? So so the thing is, yes, she could slack off, but that's not her astrology.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Right? It's someone else's astrology to slack off. It's a mutual friend of ours' astrology to slack off instead. And so so this is another point that yes, she's exercising her free will. The other side of her free will would be to say, you know what, I hate this shit, I'm not going to do it.
Exactly.
This is my karmic duty, but I hate it and I'm not going to do it.
I could ignore it and then next lifetime be bolted with more shit to do. So have to make a choice. Yeah.
And also it's within the astrology that she's aware of the ramifications of birth and rebirth. Right, so it's in the astrology. She would be attracted to the spirituality, to a path of spirituality that would emphasize birth and rebirth, and why we're here in the fucking first place, right? And so that's it's just kind of a point of an example to kind of make, which is that, hey, look, we were talking about, and I didn't even make this point when she was saying. I was just like, yeah, you're right. But then I was like. I was like, well, this is such an even more multi-layered example of what I'm talking about. Because since I know you, since I've read for you, since I've seen your chart, I know what your chart does. I know how your chart works. And
Yeah.
and basically the free will you chose was as per your chart's working. It was not against it. And that's my point. So
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. That's
thank
good
you.
to know.
So I'm going to start with the last chart that I used in the session, which in my opinion, which was also a great introduction to derivative houses, which is something that we've never really looked at here on our Sundays. And so the concept of derivative house basically hinges around the idea that any house in the chart can become an ascendant, especially since not everybody is you. So I don't have to like kind of teach. I mean, Rhonda is maybe the only person here, and maybe Marlene to a certain extent, but lesser. It might be the only person here, but Rhonda was with me on Thursday though, so she was already with me, but who might not fully know that there are parts of the chart that are other people, right? First house is life. We just talked about that, but that's your life and you and your body. But when we want to talk about the life of your brother, then the third house is the house of brothers or sister. And if we want to talk about the life of your parents or your family of origin or your father, then the fourth house is the house of father. Let's say we want to talk about your father's brother, then the sixth house, but that's getting into derivatives. Don't let me do that yet. Let's say we want to talk about your husband and what's going on with him. I mean, for instance, there's a guy named Patrick Watson. He's an astrologer. I think people may have heard of him. He put his chart up and he said, okay, you guys, do a little cold reading. Tell me something about my chart. And I looked at his chart. Are all siblings the third or his older siblings another house? Ooh, good. Of course, Shanice. Of course, good question. Okay, now this is something in my opinion that we need to everything needs study, right? Everything needs research. I have seen the 11th house as being the older sibling, and the third house as being the younger. Okay, but if there's only one sibling, then usually only the third. Okay. That's my own. So I will say that, and that please somebody take it upon themselves to research it, especially if you've got older siblings. That's one of the best places to look at in your chart. And now we're going to show you how to do it. So, like I said, if I want to know, so Patrick Watson. So Patrick said, tell me something about my chart. And I said, your father has an extremely amorous nature, which brought him to self-undoing. And Patrick Watson said, what the fuck? How did you, how did you do that? Like, damn, that was as specific as fuck. Great. Like, absolutely. So how did I do it? The cusp of the father is the fourth house. It was, if I'm not mistaken, it was Taurus it was Taurus on the cusp of the fourth. No. Scorpio on the cusp of the fourth. Venus was in the fourth in Scorpio. Mars was in the third in Libra. Okay, so they were exchanging signs. One of the things that Bonatti says is that when Venus and Mars exchange signs in each other's signs, that person will have a problem with adultery. They'll have a problem keeping their dick in their pants or keeping their panties on. And the fact that Mars was in the 12th from the 4th made me think that maybe the father had gone to jail or somehow, though, had come to a reckoning as a result. And so it had turned out that way. So we're going to basically, and this is why I did that, because the fourth house is the father, the 12th from the 4th would be the third, and the 12th house is the house of self-undoing or prisons or things of that nature. So I didn't say, did your dad go to prison for diddling little girls? I said, did your dad have an amorous nature? that got him into trouble. And it didn't have to be diddling little girls. It could have been, did your dad fuck up the family because he couldn't keep his dick in the pants, which is probably more like it. But so that's the point. That's derivative houses. When we want to know about, I want to know about this person's father, I'm going to come to the fourth house and treat the fourth house as the father's ascendant. And the first thing I would think is, since we've got the moon so close to the cusp of the fourth, this person may not have been raised by their father. This person's main parent might be a female, because usually often when I'm seeing moon or Venus in the fourth house or on the cusp of the fourth, not Cancer or Taurus, but moon or Venus themselves, that they're either from a matriarchy, that they're from a matriarchal situation, even if the father is there, or that they were raised primarily by their mother. Now, in this particular case, note that Venus is the ruler of the 10th, which is mother. And then we've got the significator for mother. It's a daytime chart. Venus is the significator for mother, and she's in the 10th. We've got moon, who's another significator for mother, down here on the cusp of the fourth. So I would expect more than likely that this person was primarily raised by mother, or that mother's major. So then based on that, I'd say, well, what about the mother? Like, what about does the mother have to deal with any illnesses or any kind? And I would also see the fact that then, okay, illnesses are the sixth house, right? The radical sixth, right? So the sixth from the fourth is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the sign of Aries is on the sixth from the fourth. Note how there's a retrograde Sagittarius Mars in the fourth house, in the planet of that particular thing. Now, I don't know anything about this person, and they can't really confirm. Although what I'll do is I'll send them a message and send them a link to this, and they can try it. There might be illness of a parent that they've dealt with. And I'm doing that only because I see the Lord of the sixth from the fourth in the fourth. Okay, that's the reason I'm saying that. So this Mars is also, let's see, it's the ruler of the fourth. It's the ruler of the fourth, not in its own sign. And then it's the ruler of the ninth. So there could be a foreign element. So if I just wanted to use it as, if I used it in the radical sense, then I would be using it as the ruler of the ninth is in the fourth. Right? The ruler of the ninth is in the fourth. And the ruler of the fourth is in the fourth, but not of his own sign. So maybe even the father is foreign. Right? Or the family, there's a foreign element to the family, or the family has traveled a lot, or the family is learned, right? Because the ninth house is the house of knowledge, right? So if I were using it just radically, then I would be looking at Mars as the ruler of the ninth house in the fourth. If I'm using it as a derivative, then I'm seeing Mars as the sixth from the fourth in the ninth, retrograde, in a sign that's not the ninth, no longer in the strength of its own sign, giving a possibility that there might be some illness in the family, or there might be some hard times. There might be hard times that the parent goes through. Bookmark that. This parent, because right, the sixth house is called bad fortune. So we can see that the parents here may have gone through some kind of bad fortune. Now, note also that the bad fortune in this person's chart is culminating. It's in the midheaven. Now, the person basically said, I used to be super ambitious and motivated, but self-sabotage and sibling loss has left me working at a bar in my hometown. So this person was very ambitious. This person was achievement oriented. We know that the 10th house is the house of achievement. So the first thing I did really was I looked at, instead of looking at like where the ruler of the ascendant is, but of course the ruler of the ascendant is there in the house of achievement. I basically did this. I said, well, he's talking about a time of life. He's saying this particular time of life, something has happened to me. It's primarily marked by this motivation towards achievement, and then something happened. So this motivation towards achievement, and I thought, and time of life, and I thought, okay, it's life, but that means that we should be separating the life into cycles. So I thought, oh, let's do triplicity rulers. So the first thing I thought was, oh, let's do the triplicity rulers of the ascendant. But then I thought, no, let's do the triplicity rulers for the light in charge. But mind you, it's earth and water, so it's going to be the same 3 planets, just in different order. And it's daytime, so it's going to start with the same planet. So it was Venus. And so I was like, oh, of course, the Venus is there. I didn't even, at this point, I hadn't even looked at the Mercury. I just immediately, like when he said, I used to be super ambitious and motivated, but this has happened. I'm in this cycle, was what he said. And so I said, cycles, okay, let's look at cycles. Let's look at the triplicity cycles. So we know that for Earth and water, the planets who are the triplicity rulers of those elements are Venus, Moon, and Mars, right? For Earth, it is specifically Venus by day, Moon by night, Mars participating. For water, it is Venus by day, Mars by night, Moon participating, right? So either way, if we were using for the first 28 years of life, either for the ascendant or for the sun, who's the light in charge, it's daytime, we'd be using Venus, who's right on the cusp of the midheaven. So we know this person was motivated towards achievement, not just from the Venus, but we know also from the Mercury, right? I wasn't even, but mind you, I wasn't looking at the Mercury yet. I was just looking at the Venus. And so I was like, oh, Venus, yeah. And then I thought sibling loss. And I was like, oh, yeah, what's going on? And I was like, okay, that shows me the motivation, and the person was on the road to making it happen. And then I was like, but then what happened? Okay, so what houses does Venus rule? And I'm like, oh, shit, she rules the 3rd house of siblings. And then I looked and I thought, oh, shit, Venus is on the cusp of the 10th house, which is the 8th from the 3rd, which is death of a sibling. And then I was like, oh, shit, look at that, the fact that the moon's next application is to the Venus. Then I was like, oh, shit, look at the fact that that Scorpio is actually the real 3rd house. That Scorpio is actually the whole sign 3rd house. And that, wait a minute, it's even shittier from that, looking at it from this respect, because who were we just talking about? We were talking about Mars as what? As the ruler of the 6th from the 4th, hard times that happen to the family. Now, right? Now, all of a sudden, we're looking at Mars as this hard time that comes from the family. Now we're not looking at, well, first of all, since we're looking whole sign, now Jupiter is the ruler of the 4th. Right? So that's the first thing. We're switching now. We're moving from this Placidus chart, more than likely, into a whole sign chart. Jupiter is now the ruler of the 4th, which means the 6th from the 4th of hard times is not Aries, but is Taurus, which is where that Venus is, right? Okay, so that the moon is now applying to that Venus. So that doesn't really quite apply to quite the same extent, but we still have this retrograde Mars. The retrograde Mars is now not the ruler of the 6th, but now he is the ruler of the 12th from the 4th. Hospitalizations, bad, what do they call it? Bad spirit, wailings and lamentations. And Mars now becomes the ruler of the 3rd radical house, which is the sibling, and becomes the ruler of the 12th from the 3rd, 12th from the 4th. So it's the bad stuff that happens to the family. And it's the 5th from the 4th, which is your parents' children. Then Mars, thankfully, is retrograding away from the opposition of the Jupiter. Right? The Jupiter is now the family. The Mars is thankfully leaving the opposition. The Mercury is the person. The Mars is thankfully leaving the opposition, but the opposition, they can still feel it. So we know this family, not just this person, but this family, we didn't even get into this on Thursday. This family is fated for something devastating, for a devastation. This family is going to be visited by bad spirit. This family, not just the person. Note that the moon's the ruler of the 12th, the ruler of the sun, who's the ruler of the 12th. And we've got the sun of the 11th with the ruler, the ruler of the 12th and the ruler of the 11th. This concept of and that's my dreams become pipe dreams. That's my dreams are shattered. Or that's pipe dreams, or I don't know what's a real dream, or what happens to my dreams. And Saturn's with Rahu. No, I know you see it, V. Saturn's with Rahu too. Wayward, ambitious, but 12th house. And Sun is opposing the part of fortune. Saturn's the ruler of the part. We were just talking about this with V, about he's back home. Mercury is applying to the Jupiter, who's the whole sign ruler of the 4th. Mercury is separating from the Mars, who basically is interrupting everything, who is the cusp ruler of the 4th. So they remember the opposition can withhold, right? This person had big dreams. It's also the 9th, it's 4th and 9th in this chart, right? So home versus travel and adventure. But it's retrograde. It's going to be unpredictable, and it's in opposition to the Mercury and the Jupiter. Also, note that by whole sign now, Mars becomes the ruler of the 8th house. So 4th and 9th for this chart, 3rd and 8th for the whole sign house. Mars becomes the ruler of the 8th house of death. He becomes now the ruler of the 3rd house of siblings and the 8th house of death. Note that Mars is separating from the ruler of the 8th house cusp, right? The Jupiter rules the 8th house per this cusp chart. Mercury is separating from Mars, who's the natural ruler of the 8th, and going to the ruler of the 8th by cusp. So we've got all of these different ways in which this chart is saying, ooh, there's a really, really bad event involving a sibling that might devastate the entire family. An accident, more than likely. Right, more than an act of violence or an accident. This chart was matter of fact, I saw this the day on Thursday. I saw this the morning of the clubhouse, and there was just too much. And once again, if we're asking about fate versus free will, the question is, why was I able to see it in the chart if the chart isn't binding? Why was I able to see it? I had to know how. I had to see it through this lens, but why was I able to see it if the chart isn't binding? If the chart is just a guidepost, it's definitely written here. Yeah, most certainly, without hesitation. There's no hesitation in seeing it. Even to the extent to if we just did some of the fun stuff that we did way back when, what's advancing? What's in a state of advancement? Which means what in this chart is either in an angle or what's either in an angle or a succeeding house. Right on the cusp of the 10th is the ruler of the 3rd. Further into the 10th is the ruler of the 6th. Hard times. Then we've got the ruler of the ascendant and what should be the natural 10th, right? But it's intercepted. And then we've got the ruler of the 8th. You know, the moon here, who's the ruler of the 11th, my dreams, right? That's how this person started, super ambitious. And note, it's in fall. My dreams, oops, there go my dreams. And it's applying to the 3rd. It's applying to the ruler of the 3rd. The sibling has something to do with why the dreams don't happen. This chart is so descriptive. And you know, so you know, it's almost, was a sibling a star? I don't know. I mean, this, like I said, this person wrote into Reddit, so they didn't say, but maybe in the family, I wouldn't be surprised. And certain, and possibly, you know, beautiful, and you know, like the apple of the eye is what I'm seeing with that Taurus symbol. But yeah, so that's kind of, that was the 3rd chart that we looked at. That was a Reddit natal chart that kind of gave us the understanding of what we were talking about. I'll go backwards. Because this was an example of essentially how in our mind, right, that our mind's container, that our mind is the container of our fate, that the mind is the container that articulates the fate, what's going on with our fate, right? This person basically wrote in and dumped the contents of her mind. Most people do. Everybody's doing that. But some people just say, oh, hey, I don't know anything about astrology. Could you tell me something about my chart? But some people come in and dump their mental contents, dump their contents. And usually their contents are surrounding a dilemma. And like I said, the best astrology you can learn how to do is how to translate people's words into their astrology. And so what she basically said was, my life dream is to have 5 kids by the age of 45, but I've got CPOS. I've got this condition, and I just got it looked at recently, and I've got actually something that's coming from my ovary, and it looks like I might not be. Basically, she said my body is not cooperating. But I have this dream, you know, I've got this life dream. So as I said, the very first thing that we did is we looked at, you know, when I saw life dream, I said, oh, that's the 11th house. This person has a life dream. This person's there. This is how the person decided. And this also goes to something else. It was an adjunct to something I think I was saying to Sen on Thursday, where I was saying that it was something I was expounding on. It wasn't your question, but it was something I was expounding on as a result. And I was talking about how I don't really think the sun doesn't really show up for me as much as I think it does, or as I think people think it does. And that I noticed all the time that generally with Reddit questions, especially when people dump their contents, essentially especially if they're new, what they're doing is they're introducing themselves to you. And that means it's the ascendant. And so almost always, and right now I'm even seeing it. Right now I'm even seeing to the extent to where I can tell you what planet is aspecting the ruler of the ascendant because of what they're saying. Somebody just wrote in something about, I have this feeling of isolation, but the ruler of the ascendant wasn't in the 12th, the moon wasn't in the 12th, but guess what? The ruler of the 12th was applying to the ruler of the ascendant from its fall. I mean, I see it over and over and over again, and it's only because I know what I'm listening to. I know what I'm looking at, and I know how to translate words into symbols. And once again, as I see over and over and over again with Reddit, if somebody's just coming at you with an issue, the sun isn't the self, the ascendant and the ruler of the ascendant are. And even in this particular case, we're going to see that it's really stuff around the 1st house, that it's not anything to do with the sun. It's stuff around the 1st house that introduced itself. So my life dream is to have 5 kids by age 45. She's ultimately saying that my life dream is the 5th house, is to have a fertile 5th house. Note that Mars is the ruler of the cusp of the 5th. I mean, sorry, the cusp of the 11th, which would be the life dream. Venus is the ruler of the cusp of the 5th, which would be children. Note that they are in Cancer in the 1st house in a fertile sign. Note that this person, this entire question or query was a 1st house query. Everything about it, and you're going to find it all the time on Reddit, on forums, on Reddit, etc. When people just kind of come from nowhere, it's the ascendant, it's not the sun, unless the sun is the ruler of the ascendant. So Venus and Mars are right on the cusp of the ascendant. The ascendant is in a fertile sign. Cancer, the water signs are fertile. The 5th house is there. The 11th house is there. Note also that Venus is the ruler of the whole sign 11th, and Mars is the ruler of the whole sign 5th, and they're together. So either way, they rule the 5th and the 11th. And there they are in the 1st, on the head. The 1st house is the house that rules the head. Note also that means they're ruled by the moon. So they're ruled by the moon, so they've got their own. So here's a great way of kind of seeing how to kind of separate or parse out significations. Even though Venus and Mars are ruled by the moon, they're operating as rulers of the 11th and 5th. So what's happening is that the moon's not affecting that per se. As the rulers of the 11th and 5th, they're just showing up on the person's head. Oh, I want this. And the thing that I want is this, right? We all have dreams. We all have dreams of things, but not everybody's dream is on their head like this, right? This is the first time that this person wrote in. This is what she had to write in her first time. She didn't say, I don't understand my chart. She didn't say, can you tell me anything about children? She didn't say blah, blah, blah. She said, my life dream is to have 5 kids by a certain time. So she dumped her contents. She dumped her contents, and she dumped the contents of her mind, her head, the 1st house, which is also the moon, the mind, right? She articulated it with Mercury, but she articulated what's going on with her mind. In this particular case, because the moon rules both the ascendant and it is the moon is the co-ruler for all things, and including the mind. The moon is the ruler for the body in this chart. Note that the moon is in the 6th house, right? The moon's in the 6th house of illness. And note that her next application, the next application she's making is to Jupiter, who is the ruler of the 6th house in his own sign and retrograde. So we know that one of the things that impedes the moon is to be in an aspect to a retrograde planet. That's something that isn't spoken of now, but when we were doing our Bonatti 146 considerations, that came up. That she doesn't operate well when she's with the planet who is in its detriment or fall, and she doesn't operate well when she's in a planet who is in her detriment or fall, and she doesn't operate well when she's with the planet when she's aspecting a planet who is retrograde. Because once again, the way I'm thinking, or my development or my thinking around retrograde planets is about unreliability and returning to things that are not necessarily useful. A temptation to the useless, or towards things that are less than useful or regressive. So there's not and in my opinion, when we talked about I think Tamarius and I were talking 2 weeks ago, my thinking around the return of virtue, which is happening here, the moon is applying to the Jupiter, who is retrograde. So whenever you have a planet A is applying to planet B, and planet B is either retrograde or combust, it's considered too weak to share in the responsibility. I'm going to talk about that for just a second. I want to get into that for just a moment, because the logic behind that is this concept called pushing management. And with pushing management, what's going on is that planet A, the planet applying, is pushing their responsibilities as per their house ownership onto the other planet to share in the responsibilities. So for instance, in this case, in the moon and Jupiter's case, the moon is basically, she's got a bundle of sticks. And she says, hey, will you help me carry this bundle of sticks to Jupiter? And Jupiter is retrograde. So he says, yeah, baby, sure. Let me just roll this joint and I'll be right with you. And give me 30 minutes. And she says, oh, 30 minutes. That's cool. I mean, you're helping me out. No problem. And so 30 minutes, she comes back and he's like, well, you know what? This weed is just so fucking good. And I really felt like, I mean, I'm having so much illumination that I really need to do a ayahuasca trip. And that's going to take another 3 hours. Can you wait for me, baby? And they're like, oh, well, I do kind of need your help. So maybe, another 3 hours I can do it, but not only another 3 hours. And he said, yeah, baby, sure. That's going this trip, man, is the way I'll be able to help you after. I'm telling you, man, you are going to be so amazed. 3 hours goes by. He can't find the motherfucker. A day goes by, 2 days go by, 3 goes by. Jupiter's ready to help, but you're already finished. You've already done it. That's, in my opinion, how the retrograde shows up. It's got the best of intentions. It can't always come through. And I'm speaking as a person whose chart ruler is retrograde. All right, so I'm speaking from experience. In this particular case, now here's the weird thing. In one of the things they say that there's 2 types of ways that a return of virtue can happen. With fitness, in other words, if it's with fitness, the planet A can go ahead and just do it themselves. If it's not with fitness, then planet A more than likely ain't going to be able to get it done. Now, this is especially when we're thinking about something like horary. Let's say we're talking about, can I have children? We're going to come back to this chart in a second. But let's think we're thinking about, can I have children? The ruler of the ascendant is applying to the ruler of the 5th, who is retrograde. Right? So that means that the ruler of the 5th isn't fully cooperating. He can't fully cooperate. He's giving it back. So let's say the ruler of the 1st is in the ascendant. Then they're saying, well, okay, yeah, that can happen. Or let's do it the opposite way around. The ruler of the 5th is applying to the ruler of the 1st, and the ruler of the 1st is retrograde. Right? So the person themselves might be having issues, but somehow the ruler of the 5th is going to find a way to make it happen, or vice versa. The ruler of the 5th can't help, but somehow the ruler of the 1st is going to find a way to make it happen. Let's say the ruler of the 5th is in the 12th and the ruler of the 1st is in the 3rd. They're both detriment. They're both not detrimented. They're both cadent. That's not going to be very useful. So as far as the perfection of that thing is concerned, it's not going to be the best kind of perfection, shall we say, or it may not be able to come to pass. Now, when we're looking in a natal chart and we're thinking about the concept of perfection, especially in this chart, this chart, obviously, it can perfect even, and in my opinion, it can perfect in the worst kind of way, because unpredictability is one of the things that retrogradation, in my opinion, also shows up. And so in this way, even though the moon is in a cadent house, which would usually be what we would consider a virtue, a return of virtue with detriment, in this case, there's a reception. The moon is in Jupiter's house and sign. And Jupiter is also in his own sign and house. And so the moon is pushing nature at Jupiter, and Jupiter is pushing power back at the moon. This is basically this, it couldn't be, and then Jupiter is not only pushing his power onto the moon, Jupiter is pushing his unpredictability. So inherent, so this is what, when I'm talking about all the time about how the universe has a sense of humor, they're just the only ones laughing. This is this kind of chart. Because, the laughs on us rather, because this is the universe laughing at this poor person. Because look, the moon rules the 1st house, which houses the ruler of the 11th and the 5th, which houses the life dream of hyperfertility. But the moon's applying to the 6th house ruler, which is infirmity. The body, which on the one hand is saying, have babies, is also on the other hand saying, but I'm going to make it too difficult for you to have babies. Have babies. Want those babies. Aren't they cute? Aren't they sweet? Oh, their skin's so soft. Oh, they smell so good. Oh, we want many of them, don't we? But guess what? Our body can't necessarily, our body is acting in an unpredictable way that somehow thwarts our dream. So where's the so one, where are the reproductive organs being thwarting the dream, and where's the thwarting of the dream, and where's the reproductive organs? Two things. Venus is the natural symbol or the natural significator for the reproductive organs. Note that she's with a fallen malefic. She's applying to a fallen malefic. Yes, Jupiter is there. Trining, they're both applying to the trine of Jupiter, and that's really lovely and everything. But if it were that lovely, she wouldn't be writing into Reddit with these problems, right? And don't forget, Jupiter is ruler of the 6th house, bad fortune, and he is what? He's advancing based on this chart. Excuse me, on this cusp chart, he's in a state of advancement. And note that the moon's next applications are to Mercury, who rules the 12th, and Jupiter, who rules the 6th. So we've got Venus, who's the natural significator of my ovaries and my womb and all of, the material that's going to make the baby or hold it or form the baby. And then we've got the ruler of the 8th house. Whoever the 8th house ruler is also the reproductive organs. And that, in this particular case, is Saturn. Note that Saturn is ruled by Venus. So that's even so the life dream or right, Venus rules the 5th, but also she's intercepted. She rules the intercepted 11th. So she's both. And so Saturn's in that intercepted part of the 11th that Venus rules. That's all about wanting babies because she rules the cusp of the 5th too. But Saturn, of course, is what? The obstacle. Saturn is the delay. So we've got Saturn in the house of the life dream, the 11th house, in the house that representing representing the reproductive organs himself as the ruler of the 8th, but also being himself the obstacle. Then we've got Venus, the ruler of the natural ruler of the reproductive organs, with this malefic. And don't forget what's one of the things that Mars can do as a malefic? Interrupt, cut off, abort, miscarry. Right? When people talk about miscarriages and abortions, I immediately look for Mars and being connected with the 5th house of the ruler of the 5th. Mars does the cutting. That's right. Mars is the sharp objects. I just did a chart reading for my acupuncturist, and she was Scorpio rising. And the first thing I thought, oh, needles, of course. And Mars was in the 6th, right? So just one of those. Sometimes it screams, right? Where the fuck is the fate? Where the fuck is the free will? Right? I've got an acupuncturist chart with Scorpio rising and Mars in the 6th. Tell me where the free will is. Same thing though with this chart. And so like I said, this is one of those unfortunate charts where the joke's on them and the universe is laughing, unfortunately. And I know V and Shanice and probably CF and a few other but I know V and Shanice and CF probably have an idea of whether they think this can happen or not. I think I can go to another. Where's that other chart? I thought I had that open. Hold on 1 second. It's this one. This is the one we started with, which was really uncanny. God damn it! Oh, there it is. Perfect. Okay, 1 second. Okay, this is a chart of an astrological win that I'd had on Reddit when I first started, or like not first started, but early into it. I wish I can make this bigger, but the fucking thing won't go away. If it would go away, then I could make it. There we go. Yay. All right. All right. So this person wrote in and asked, I read that our medical condition is connected to astrology. Wait, y'all can't see it, or hold on a second. She got a wound or a scar, blocked tubes. She said, does the chart show anything about my deformities? Okay, she said, does she have a wound or a scar? So CF says, does she have a wound or a scar, blocked tubes? And in a minute, in a second, after I tell you what actually, no, go ahead. CF, tell us why you said that. Oh, the former chart, not the chart we're looking at right now, this October 2002 chart. I don't know that well, actually, yes, I do know. Hold on a second. Let me see what she wrote. Give me 1 second. Because I write out the entire thing usually. Oh, I have to do it. Oh, fuck, I know how to do it. 1 second. Oh, she had CPOS, or is that what it's called? Is that the correct term for it? And there was some kind of problem that was coming from her ovary. There was like a crack of some sort. Basically, it didn't look like she was going to be able to carry any children term. PCOS, yes. Okay, so new share. Let's go back to. Oh, okay. Well, I was trying to open this other one. I read that our medical. Okay. God damn it. Fuck, sorry. What the fuck? Why is this so difficult? Hold on 1 second. I'm going to pause the. All right. Finally, this fucking thing. There we go. Okay. So she said, does my chart show anything about my deformities? She didn't say what they were. So I looked at the chart, and the first thing I said to her was, are your deformities in your arms, hands, shoulders, knees? Are there bone deformities? And then, so that was the first line. And then I went into a delineation, and I also brought up skin issues and a few other things. And so she wrote back, and everything that I mentioned was, a matter of fact, her deformity was, what was it? She had misshapen shoulders. She had an underbite. She had this kind of big underbite with her jaw. She had misshapen fingers. She had knock knees. She had eczema. She had skin rashes. So this was the first chart that I used when we started on Thursday, and it was basic. And my basic premise was, especially for those who are saying you should be able to transcend your chart. What do we say to a disabled person? Ultimately, that kind of talk is highly ableist. Right? There's an ableist kind of feeling to it, which I didn't even think about until this chart came up, because it's like, oh, we should all be powerful enough to overcome our chart. Well, what if it's in your chart that you're supposed to have physical deformities that you're not able to overcome? Right? What about a Franklin Delano Roosevelt who, got polio at 37 and then, spent the rest of his life, paralyzed? I mean, actually, I went to school with somebody. He, around his 18th birthday, he got into a car accident and was paralyzed from the neck down for the rest of his life. How do you free will your way out of that one? So this was my point, is that if I can read it, it's written. I was able to read that. I was able to tell this person what parts of their body were, and she wrote back and said, thank you. Now I understand why. Now I have an understanding of why that's the case, or what's or where these things are about, or how it think. Now somebody else, now I just saw this, as a matter of fact, I had to remove some comments from a person. Somebody wrote in about, I'm having problems having children. What's going on? And a traditional astrologer wrote in. Now, you people who follow me on Thursdays, I talk a lot about how being accurate is not the end of the job. Right? Being accurate is not the end of the job. The end of the job is finding some way to make life palatable. No matter what the hell is going on, right? But a lot of traditional astrologers fall into the trap of, is it right? Did I get it right? I got it right. Fuck you. I got it right. So this person wasn't fuck you, I got it right, but they were, they delineated. And it was a beautiful delineation, and it wasn't particularly optimistic. Somebody else wrote in and berated them for it. They were just like, astrology is supposed to be helpful, and what you did wasn't fucking helpful, blah, 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 and went off on it. And I basically got rid of those. It was reported, and I got rid of them. But my point was, if I'd wanted to engage that person, what I would have told them is some of the stuff I say on Thursday. On the other hand, the problem with modern astrology is what you would have done is you would have told her yes. The modern astrology is the art of saying yes. You would have told her yes, and you would have been wrong. And you would have been wrong, and she would have felt good, but later down the road, she would have wondered why she still doesn't have any children, and she would come back to Reddit. She'd come back to Reddit in 6 months, in 9 months, in a year, and say, somebody told me that yes, it was going to happen, but it hasn't happened yet. So, and this happens all the time. This happens when you motherfuckers say, you've got Gemini on the cusp of the 10th, be a writer, go into teaching. This happens when y'all say, not y'all, but these people just say whatever the fuck they want to say. People take it as gospel truth. And then 6 months down the line, they're like, wait, that didn't work. What I'm confused. Wait, somebody told me that I have a yod. What does that mean? I'm confused. Almost everything I see in modern astrology creates more confusion than clarity. And so my response to that person would really have been, yes, that person didn't take care of the whole deal. More than likely, they're a young person getting involved in traditional astrology, and they're being highly rigorous. And even the person says, okay, so we can tell that you studied. We can tell you know your shit. It's like, fuck you, motherfucker. You don't. You would have gotten the shit wrong and told her everything was okay. But neither is all right. The thing that needs to happen is those of us who know that we can be right, we've got to find a way to make life livable. We've got to find a way, not just to make life livable, but to restore the hope in life. I mean, because I was that guy. I was that astrologer who nailed the shit, but didn't give anybody hope. And it's not even, and 11th house, hope. This is a person, that's what I always say. Well, I mean, but no, thank you, but I had a client say that about me. And it's all, and the problem is because, as our good friend Dennis Sumlin would say, people want to run away from their pain. People want to run from it, and people want to run to astrology as a salve. We can provide a salve. We can, but I do not think that pussyfooting around, sugarcoating, blowing smoke up asses, any of that kind of stuff is useful either. Make it meaningful. We can bear up if it, yeah. We can bear up if it means something. Make it meaningful. We had that session a while ago on locating the soul on the Thursday, not on the Sunday, where we have a video for. But we had it where that one guy came in and he said he'd come in late. So I had already made my little spiel about what you're here to do isn't always what the job you're here to do. It doesn't always have anything to do with your vocation, nor does it always have anything, nor is it anything necessarily exalted. And so he came in and he was like, yo, man, you know, I need some help. You know, I just quit my job and blah, blah, blah. And I said, hey, well, you know, look, I said, I can tell you maybe what your life purpose is, but it may not have anything to do with your job. So I looked, he told me about the chart, and I'll never forget, he had Moon in the first house, and in Taurus, and Venus in Libra in the sixth. And so what I said, you remember that, Shanice? I'm pretty sure Shanice and V were there. And I said, oh, this is the kind of chart where it's, ooh, that looks good, and ouch, and oh, that smells really good. Oh, why did you do that? Or like, pretty much this person is led by their senses, and almost always it should be something that fucks them over, right? Because the Venus was in the sixth of the bad fortune. So it might be, they'd still get to experience the pleasure, but the pleasure would bring some kind of consequence, unforeseen and unwanted consequence. Do you remember what the guy said, Shanice? He said, dude, that was, you just talked the story of my life. That's what he said. You just gave me the story of my life. And I said, see, it didn't have anything to do with your work life. So if I can do that, if I can read the story of this guy's life who just walked into my clubhouse room, if I, and you know, I just kind of cold read some, you know, 2 details, and they just happen to be right on the fucking money. He told me that was the story of his life. He told me that I nailed the centrifugal point of his vritti. Marlene talks about when she does her healing. We were just talking about it today. When she does her healing, and she says, well, the healing that we do, though, is the only kind that can get into the karmic coils. And you all know that one of the things I talk about all the time is the vritti. Find the vritti in the chart. There's a vritti. Everybody's in a vritti. Find their vritti, and I'm telling you, the relief when you find that person's vritti in the chart, they will trust you with anything. And ultimately, Marlene, that's what you're doing too, is you're dealing with vrittis. You're dealing with like energetic manifestations of people's karmic vrittis. Because these coils are essentially things that keep them entrenched in cycles that are not working well. Isn't that correct, Marlene? If she's still with us. But that's what, I'm almost positive I'm right. So, but that's essentially what vrittis do. Yoga chitta vritti naroda. Yoga is the ceasing of the turnings of the mind. It's only ceasing the turnings that we find the samadhi. But we have to overcome the turning. And remember that the moon is circular. The moon is the circle of our thoughts. The moon is the circular nature of our thoughts. The moon is the circular nature of thinking. Okay, with that in mind, I'm going to open it to comments and questions. And you can come off if you want. You can write them in the chat.
Something I saw in that chart, the Cancer ascendant one, was that aspect from Jupiter being the Lord of the sixth, right? Something's really curious about that to me. And I wonder if that also points to her going to get intervention or needing to have it eventually. And then seeing Mars there in the ascendant, right? And it's fallen. It's seeing that is like, I wonder what that story is really going to end up being.
You know, I'm glad you brought that point up, because the thing I didn't even think about is the fact that both Moon and Jupiter are ruling that ascendant. That's the other thing, right? Because Jupiter's the exaltation ruler. And it, in my opinion, it might be the optimism that makes her hold on to it in the face of the reality. Because I think we can all pretty much agree that the reality is it's not going to happen. And so the Jupiter, even if it's unwarranted, because that's an aspect about Jupiter, about, you know, benefic isn't always beneficent. One man's beneficence is another man's maleficence, right? And so what's benefic, what seems benefic in this chart, what seems should be the bounty, the gift, the gold, the golden bowl or whatever, the pot of gold. I think that there's such a pot of gold thinking about this that the Jupiter won't let them let go of it, because the Jupiter is holding the hope. Because remember, Jupiter is hope as well. And so I think so Jupiter as hope is because the 11th house isn't just hope, Jupiter is hope. And so I think that that's a note that the moon's applying to the Jupiter, right? You know, and so the Jupiter's kind of dispersing this false hope. It's raining, it's the manna from heaven that's really confetti. Because he's still ruler of the 6th.
Yeah, I was looking
Right?
at that.
Right? He's still ruler of the 6th, which means you're going to have to work. You're going to have to work for it. You're going to slave for it. Or you're going to get sick over it or something. I wonder if she does manage to have kids, whether motherhood is difficult. Oh, that's an interesting point too. I think it's all, I mean, I look at the Mercury as pipe dreams, right? The moon's next application is to the Mercury. Mercury's ruler is the 12th. Moon's next application is to Mercury. And note that Mercury is in Leo. It's in a fixed sign. So this pipe dream, and it's close to Regulus. You know, so this pipe dream so that's giving us a clue too, because Sun's there too. This is something that somehow personally exalts them. They're seeing themselves as Queen Mother. You get that, V? You feel that too?
Yeah, I can see. Yeah, I'm trying to look at it with the Jupiter got me right now. I'm trying to look at it with a little bit of hope.
Oh, got it. Okay, I'm with you. Okay.
Yeah.
I bet Shanice, I'm sure you're feeling it too, right? They want to look good in church. Yeah, I mean, something, right? Part of fortune in the 9th and whatever, or something like that. There's some kind of way in which this is about being about reigning over a kingdom with that Mercury on the Regulus, and with the Mercury as the ruler of the 12th on the Regulus. And also note Mercury rules the 4th in this chart, right? So that's family and home, and that's Heimat, as the Germans would say, which is home. Right. So even that, so there's this concept of family that's a pipe dream that she will not, because when I was talking about the Jupiter and I was like, she won't let go of it. I was like, that sounds so fixed and the Jupiter is mutable. But like I said, I think the Jupiter is constantly, the Jupiter is spiking the punch with LSD to make us think that we can have it. And then the Mercury, and the moon's next application is to the Mercury, the detriment of the Mercury. The Mercury is fixed and retrograde and close to Regulus. It's starstruck. I really feel like, I wonder, more so than CF, more so than church, I wonder if she believes she's going to give birth to somebody important. This is Queen
A
Mother.
lot of women say that. They give birth to Jesus every few months. I get who's giving birth to Jesus. He's going to be the Messiah.
Yeah, Queen Mother. That's what I'm saying. Queen Mother is something about this. Yeah, so I think even more than the church thing, I'm going to have a famous brood, like the Von Trapp family. Or some shit like that, because Venus is on the cusp of right on the ascendant, so there might be something even about music or something like that. I mean, this person likes sex. Obviously, we got Venus, Mars, but obviously this person wants fertility. This might be the kind of chart. And tell me if you think I'm right. This is the kind of chart who would entrap somebody into marriage. This is somebody who wants children. Wants children more than marriage, but they want it all, and they would either fool somebody or try. I think this person would go that far because it's a life dream. What were you going to say, B?
That's exactly what I was going to ask you. Like, do you know if she's actually married or if she's plotting on somebody as she's like struggling with the lack of her fertility?
I think she's plotting. She didn't say anything about marriage, which I thought was fascinating. She didn't say me and my husband are trying. She didn't say my boyfriend and I are trying. She basically just said, this is what I want, and this is my physical problem. Some people look at parenthood as a status symbol and are not really aware of or concerned with the work of being a parent and raising whole, conscious, happy children. I could easily see parenthood shattering a dream of being a status symbol and being more work than they bargained for. I think, and you were the, Shanice, you were the one that asked if having children would be good once she had them. Maybe a child with health problem, yeah, right? Or clashing personalities. Well, let's see who the child would be. Mars would be the child of Venus. This Venus-Mars thing would be the child. She could have a scandalous child who, you know, who is scandalous to the parent. The parents are scandalized by their behavior, right? If we use the Mars as the ruler of the child, as you know, the whole sign fifth, then it's a Mars in fall. If we use the Venus, then it's a Venus with Mars. So the child could not be able to keep their hands to themselves, be handsy, and want to play. You know, I'll show you mine if you show me yours, and which could certainly be a problem, right? So yeah, I think all of the things you're saying really fit with what we're looking at, and also, and once again, I think the other thing is, once again, Jupiter, in my opinion, is spiking the punch. He's putting LSD in the punch. This is fantasy land. The moon is squaring the Jupiter. The moon is trining the Mercury. So making it easy the pipe dream is easy.
There's a feeling also of positivity, a continuous positivity.
Yes.
Everything is positive, because I believe in, I have faith in that Jupiter.
Yes, that's my point. Thank you. Thank you for reiterating that for me. Yes, Jupiter is faith and hope. And so there's an optimism. So, and note that he's the most elevated planet in the chart. He and the Saturn, Saturn, who rules the 8th house of reproductive organs. So note, right, and they're both advanced, right? Jupiter's in the 10th, Saturn's in the 11th. They're both angular and fixed respectively, but based on this chart. Note that by whole signs, the Jupiter is not, but the Saturn still is. He would be in the 11th. He's still in the 11th, rather. So I find even that interesting, because that means that the planet that represents the 8th house is in a state of advancement. And so what would be advancing by whole sign in this chart would be the Venus, the Mars, the Sun, Mercury, right, which we've already talked about. And of course, the Mercury is the ruler of the 12th, and the moon is applying to it. And not the Jupiter and not the moon, which means that, and which is exactly what we saw, that the Jupiter and moon are kind of this secret thing, because remember, the moon, the Mars Venus is being ruled by the Jupiter moon. The moon Jupiter is ruling this Venus Mars conjunction, but it's operating in the background. It's operating in the background as kind of this secret foe, as this nemesis, as like a secret nemesis. As a matter of fact, let's look at what the nemesis of this chart is. So the part of nemesis, hold on a second. Because we could say this really is the nemesis of this for this person. And if I'm not mistaken, I think it's Saturn to the part of fortune. Hold on. Saturn to the part of fortune, and part of fortune is Saturn. Okay. Okay, so it's nighttime. Part of fortune is Saturn. 29 Aquarius to 3 Taurus. So that would be what, 60 plus 4. We'll just do 60 plus 4. So that's 16 degrees of Virgo is the nemesis. What did I just say? Mercury, that 12th house. Virgo, Mercury's the ruler of the nemesis in this chart. The moon is moving toward, the next application is to the Mercury at 2730. The Jupiter's at 2735. Note that the Mercury and the Jupiter are both retrograde. So Mercury rules nemesis. And don't forget that the moon's the ruler of the ascendant. So that means that the ruler of the ascendant's next application is to nemesis. So how do we make meaning for her? That's a great question. In my opinion, the very first thing that we have to do is break through, is we have to actually throw the punch out. That's the very first thing. We have to throw out the punch and start giving her water. Right? Because the punch is telling her it's all going to be okay. There's still hope. It can still happen. I'm never going to let this up. I have this dream that I'm never going to let it go. Sober up. That's right. Sober up. And so the first thing would be, hey, the first thing I would basically do, because this is what I do generally when I have a client and it ain't going to get any better, I can tell from the chart, what I generally say to them is very, very seriously and purely hypothetically, what would you do if it were not to happen? How would you, let's say it were not to happen. What does your life mean then? How do we, because that's the question that this person needs, because they're only guided by this one principle. The only thing on their head is this. But as I mentioned before, Venus is arts and music. The Mars is weapons and sharp objects, and the moon is in Sagittarius. She needs to take up archery. Archery, that was Artemis's, the moon goddess's favorite thing. Take up archery. You spoke on Thursday about the remedy for a broken dream, the casting of a magic spell that could affect a humanizing of the chart somehow, a casting of a throw in a certain direction. I was talking about planetary charity in that respect, and she could do it for the Mars in this chart. And because Mars is the ruler of the 5th and the 11th. Yeah, so she could do I would definitely give them the charity. Thank you. I would give them the planetary charity, knowing it wasn't going to do a goddamn thing, to be honest. I'm going to be 100% honest, especially now that I've done the part of Nemesis and see that the moon is applying to it. And see, once again, that's more of this joke's on you stuff. That's more of that. Because this would be her free will if she did something. I think her free will, in my opinion, is walking away from the dream. And volunteering at an orphanage.
I was just about to ask, would you recommend something like fostering or adoption or something else that would be like a pivot? But she needs to, because see, she could still be the mother of us all. This person wants to be the mother of us all. So she could still be that, but see, because the Lord of the pipe dream is near Regulus in Leo, which is all about recognition, and near Regulus, which is about kingship, this person wants it to exalt them. This person wants it to exalt them. This person, it's like kind of like my birth mother with it. Only reason to have children is for how it shows back on you. Right, you get to a certain point with the adult children. Like, for instance, my best friend Kim, both of her sons, she has 3 children. Both of her sons went to Harvard. She's almost 60, which means that when she gets around, she's a church lady. She gets around her church ladies, you know what the fuck happens. Oh yes, well, my sons went to Harvard. Or when the thing comes around, or, someone said, well, my son, he's back living with me again, blah, 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 blah. Now, both of her sons live with her. Both of her sons live with her. But when it comes to pedigree, comparing, she can say, my sons went to Harvard. That's something that foists her position way further, or that's something that lifts her position higher. That's why Indian families don't want you to be anything but Indian and African families don't want you to be anything but an engineer or a doctor or a lawyer, because it's how it pumps up the family to have that in the family, right? This is the same thing, but she thought motherhood would do it. But note also that the Mercury's in a sterile sign. There is so much joking
in this chart. And the worst thing about it, the worst thing about it is the funnier the heavens find it, the sadder the worst time we tend to have of it. I mean, look at it. I mean, it's even getting to the point where I feel like there's no such thing as coincidences even. Where it's like, ha ha ha, not only is this the thing that you're going to want the most, but we're going to position everything so that it's hard for you to give it up. We're going to position for it so that it's not only is an overriding dream, but it's the thing that you think could turn you into gold, right? Sun rules gold. We're going to make it so that it's all you think about. And we're also going to give you this nature that never backs down in the face of negativity. All these things so that you pursue this one thing that you want to no avail. Because that's the karma you have to go through. The disappointment, the constant disappointment, this is what this karma is about, is can you keep the punch spiked? So that might be the other way, CF, that I might fast, is that, you know what, you're spiking your punch with the wrong LSD, or you're putting the LSD into the wrong flavor. This chart has a lot of ability to make people happy, to make yourself happy, to turn a frown upside down. You need to be scattering your LSD into other people's punches. Jupiter is charity. Jupiter is gift giving. But because this nemesis, who's with the chart ruler, don't forget, nemesis is with the chart ruler. Because this nemesis is in self-serving Leo, and very, very close to the king, the heart of the lion, she can't do it. So that's what I would do. I try to dismantle the king. I would dethrone the king first. I would be dethroning him, because it's a pipe dream. This shit is a fucking pipe dream. It's not going to happen. She's born in 98. She's what, 24? But from what's going on, and from the way she described what's happening, it's not going to, I mean, what's going on with her physical condition. I mean, she could maybe have one child with much difficulty from the way she described it. So so I think that's kind of my point about the fate of this entire thing. Like how we started, character is destiny too. And as I said, people thought that was the way out of determinism, until we realized that people do what they do, and often they can't change from being what they are. They can't be better. Sometimes some people can't be better. Right? And so that means character really is destiny. Sun opposes Uranus, which is a bit of an obsessed crank. Yeah. I love that. Bit of an obsessed crank. I think the non-reality, the constant reaching, and the non-reality of this square is what makes it really dangerous.
Can we highlight the husband situation though? Because it doesn't look like there's one coming either.
Ow! Well,
poor girl. I mean, yeah.
No. Let's dig in, shall we? Okay, so obviously Saturn's only in Taurus. He's only peregrine, so he can kind of produce. But note that he's separating from Neptune, so there's more fantasy. Right? More delusions and fantasy. Then, okay, so then also, what is anything applying to the Saturn? I think nothing is. Mars is the exaltation ruler. And so look at how Venus is there with it. Who's so part of fortune? Let me look. Okay. I think this. First triplicity ruler of the 7th house is the marriage. So it's Capricorn, which is Earth, and it's nighttime. So that would be the moon. That would be this thing we're talking about, which confirms this thing, right? This is all about optimism and self-delusion in the form of optimism, in the form of constant, annoying optimism ad nauseum, right? And then we know that the ruler of the seventh here is separating from the Neptune, which is already creating smoke screens, creating glamours, creating, it looks like one thing, but it's really another, right? Or my fantasy, will it come true? And, he's at the very end of the seventh. We put him in the eighth, but still that thing is working. Then we would look at what's going on with the triplicity rulers for Venus as well. It's water and earth, so it's the same three planets, Venus, Mars, and the moon. Well, here are the Venus and the Mars. Here is the moon. I think that the non-reality reigns in this chart. And one of the things I realized during my Saturn return even, was when it came to relationships, to intimacy relationships, that I had no idea about the reality of them. I had never experienced, nor did I have any kind of understanding about the reality of them. I think that this person is in a similar dilemma, that this person is guided and ruled by fantasy, and that the reality of it, as you said, Shanice, that the reality of any of these things would be a letdown. But the reason that they would be a letdown is because they cannot give up the grip. They can't let the grip go. This is a chart that would be, this is a chart that would come to us and not listen. I'm sorry to say, in my opinion. There are plenty. It happens all the time. So we're way beyond being insulted at this point, right? But this is a chart where we would have worked hard to figure out something, and they would probably not listen, because that Mercury is just too intractable, and with the sun there too. Something about this is, you know what it's like? It's like the old pirate that he's 80 years old and he's still talking about that hidden treasure that he couldn't find. He's still the crank. Yes, Queen Mother needs to show off. Yeah, it's that old. It's the pirate's gold. It's the pirate's gold, and we keep talking about it forever and ever. I could have had that pirate's gold, and the pirate. And if I was that close to the pirate's gold, and I went the wrong direction, and then the wind cut me timbers, and that kind of bullshit, right? I think that's what's going. I think that's what's going on in this chart. I think that's what's going on. Okay, questions, comments. If we're going to be, if there's going to be some discussion, I think I'd like to keep the thing. Usually, I'll stop the recording, and we just kind of can have our little chit chat. If there's anything that's on the discussion or on the subject of fate versus free will that you'd like to add right now, I'd like to keep that on the tape, and then we can stop it and shoot the shit and talk about other stuff. How do you deal with it when you see things like this in your own chart? Ooh, good question. Well, what can you do? Right? What can you do? You can only be, you got to be you. You got to be you and do you. And I think the best thing that you can do is try to be guided by finding the best you. If there's some of these things in the chart and they point to you not being the best you, then the first thing that has to happen is you have to commit to the best you. And then the work has to be about the constant work towards being the best you. It's kind of like what I just said about when we're involved in a vritti, when we're involved in a karmic situation, and there are the three types of karma, right? There's the karma we can affect, the karma we can't affect, the karma some of which we can and some of which we can't. Then when we find ourselves in that situation, then the work starts with us. Like I said, I'm the gay guy that loves straight guys, and it fucked me over time and time again. Not just straight guys, but straight guys that can sniff out a gay motherfucker that likes them. And so time and time again, I would sniff that shit out, and they'd sniff me out and work me over. And you know, I'm left with the bag full of nothing, and they've gotten all the attention and all the strokes and whatever else that they needed. And it wasn't until I finally started to, one, see the signs, and to two, to recondition myself. I had to recondition my own response. You know, I had to not fall for it when he tickled my chin, or I had to not, whatever the fuck. You know, I had to not fall for it. I had to change the way I did things. I didn't change me, but I just changed the way I did certain things. And lo and behold, before I knew it, within a year or something, I stopped attracting guys like that. I didn't attract anything else. This is what I mean about some you can change and some you can't. I didn't attract anything else. That's just me and my karma. I could have. I've known people who have, you know, I had one friend when I moved to Texas. I had a friend that I was working with, and she was 31. I was kind of talking about her loosely on Thursday. She was 31, and she was like, oh, I'm just so sick of all the stuff that I attract relationship wise, but I want a relationship, but I just don't want what I've attracted before. And now she's married and she's got 2 children. You know, she figured it out. She figured herself out in relation to the karma, and then the right man came. That's not always guaranteed, in my opinion. It wasn't in mine. So she's sobered. So I guess there's a sobering. There's a sobering up we all have to do on some level, is in relation to our karma. Because hey, that's a really good idea, because I feel like our karma, the karma, and remembering that karma is also a condition, and so that our karmic conditions can make us drunk, so that we act in a certain way. We act in this drunk way in the face of this karma, until we can get our bearings. Like, you know, I was raised with my mother was an inhuman monster, and so I went into Dragon Slayer with her, and I had to condition myself out of that Dragon Slayer personality when I was dealing with somebody who was like her, but didn't have quite the mojo. Right? I didn't have to bring Saint Michael and the sword, or Saint George, you know, the power of Saint George in to fend this shit off. I just needed to have said, you know, 1 or 2 words. I had to figure it out. But also I had that karmic situation with my mother where that's where we went. We went into that dragon night and dragon place. That was our drunkenness. So she was the dragon, obviously. She was the dragon. So that means then, yeah, when we are able to break these bonds, it's because of how we changed ourselves. And so that's my answer to you, is that it's always going to be about changing yourself, no matter what the result is ultimately. Anymore. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording, and we can now do